Listening for the bass line. The old wooden workbench in the back of David's garage was a masterclass in the microscopic. For 30 years, as a teacher and an artisan, his life had been defined by the fine-grained details, the precision of a hand plane shaving a millimeter of oak, the exact placement of a line of code, the meticulous parsing of a single line of text. Lately, though, David felt a strange, persistent friction. He had been studying a series of ancient historical documents, focusing heavily on a verse-by-verse, line-by-line analysis. It was deep, valuable work, yet, the closer he stared at the individual words, the more a persistent emptiness crept in. He was hyper-focusing on the wood grain, but he was losing the shape of the cathedral. He was staring at the bark of a single tree and entirely missing the ridge of the mountain. The breakthrough didn't happen at his desk. It happened on a Tuesday evening when his grandson, Leo, was sprawled on the living room rug, staring intensely into his tablet. He was playing an interstellar combat game, the screen casting a blue glow on his face. Suddenly, the ambient arcade sound effects faded out. From the tablet speakers came a low, heavy, rhythmic brass pattern, 3 deliberate, minor notes that seemed too big for the device. Done. 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 Leo didn't look up from his screen, but his shoulders instantly tensed. "Oh man," the boy muttered, "he's coming." David looked from the screen to his grandson. "Leo, the screen is black. You haven't even seen the villain yet." "I don't need to see him, Grandpa," Leo said, his fingers flying across the glass controller. "I can hear him. The music always tells you what's coming before it happens." David sat frozen in his armchair. The word hit him like a physical blow, a piece of dormant German terminology rising to the surface of his memory. Leitmotif, the leading theme, the guiding motive. He leaned back, his mind suddenly racing far beyond the television screen. The music tells you what's coming before it happens. The next morning, David didn't open his texts to dissect individual words. Instead, he went into his workshop, pulled out a large roll of butcher paper, and laid it across the workbench. He began to draw a map, not of geographic locations, but of patterns. He realized that the 19th century Germans hadn't actually invented the leitmotif when they named it for their operas. John Williams hadn't invented it for cinema. They had simply stumbled upon a law of the universe, a piece of God physics built into the very architecture of reality. The creator wasn't a chaotic architect dropping random, disconnected events into history. He was an orderly composer, running a magnificent subsurface soundtrack beneath the noise of time. On the paper, David drew a single tree. Beneath it, he wrote, the isolated verse, the individual crisis, the daily trial. Then, he stepped back and drew a massive, sweeping wave across the entire page, connecting the roots of a dozen different trees. He realized that when humans look at life or text exclusively tree by tree, they treat reality like a random textbook. But when you train your ears to hear the leitmotif, the textbook transforms into a symphony. He began to write down the patterns he had missed because he had been staring too closely at the bark. He saw the leitmotif of the well. For years, he had read isolated stories about travelers stopping for water, Abraham's servant, Jacob, Moses, and finally Jesus talking to a Samaritan woman. Staring at the individual trees, they were just ancient conversations about hydration and marriage. But listening to the soundtrack, David realized the composer was playing the grand theme of covenant across millennia. Jesus wasn't just thirsty, he was standing in the exact sonic resonance of Genesis, claiming his bride. He saw the leitmotif of the wilderness, Moses wandering, Elijah hiding in a cave, Jesus fasting. Isolated, they looked like punishment or abandonment, but the overarching melody revealed the truth. The wilderness was never a blank space. It was God's transformation chamber, the place where the composer tunes the instrument before the next great movement. David sat on his stool, looking at the butcher paper. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place as his eyes drifted to a faded index card pinned to his bulletin board. Romans 8:28. He had read that verse 1,000 times. He had heard people quote it like a superficial band-aid to soothe an injury. But looking at his map of the forest, the verse exploded with structural mechanics. All things work together. The Greek word was synerge, a symphonic blending of sounds. David looked at his own hands, calloused from decades of labor, and thought about the discordant, screeching notes of his own life, the losses, the seasons of painful waiting, the sudden disruptions that felt like absolute chaos. When he stared at those moments as isolated verses, they sounded like a terrible mistake. But the law of God physics promised something grander. The composer doesn't say the individual screeching note is a pleasant melody. He promises that because he is the supreme orchestrator, he will force that harsh, painful note to cooperate with his dominant theme. He will weave it into the grand score until the resolution becomes breathtakingly beautiful. David walked out onto his porch, looking out at the massive tree line bordering his property. The wind was moving through the Douglas firs, creating a deep, resonant rush of sound. He smiled, sliding a new tool into his mental tool belt, the ability to step back, to stop panic reading the single chaotic verse of a difficult day, and to simply listen. Looking at the individual trees was good, it was necessary for the work, but the forest was where the meaning lived, and beneath it all, if he just quieted his mind, he could hear the master composer humming the bass line of grace, holding the entire creation together.